We got Dragon Warrior 2 up now, huh? Alright, god damn it, let me get this fucking thing set up. Dragon Warrior Part 2. Well, what do I got to say about this? Well, okay. Upon starting this game, what really got to me right off the bat is how much more context they give you for the story. Okay. Right off the bat, I want to make mention that this game is very much the exact same game as the first game. It is less tightly designed. It's a much looser design, in fact. The actual changes we have from the previous game to this one is we get much more context to the adventure than we did the first time around, with some like actual cutscenes, especially there at the beginning, and we have like an actual structure to the quest. So instead of the game basically just telling you you have to do this thing and you can get it done in any order you want, you just have to find the way to do it. It's very much go here and do this, then once you get it done, you're given something else you need to do, but you are given the overarching objective at the very beginning still, which is fine. But this game has a few particular upsides about it that I'd like to talk about, which would be, basically the combat is a whole lot more interesting this time around, and that's due to a couple of factors. First off, you get to fight multiple enemies at once this time around, instead of one enemy at a time. Then, some of the first things that happen are you recruit 2 more playable characters, and that gives you an actual party system to deal with, which adds more to the management of the combat system, just like having multiple enemies to deal with adds to the combat system. And then those characters you recruit have specialized purposes in battle, as does your main character. So instead of having a singular character who just kind of does everything, you have like a warrior, a healer, a mage, you know? So they all do specific things, they all have their own specific advantages and disadvantages, and they get their own equipment and stuff, which is all great and fine and everything, and adds a lot to the depth and complexity of the combat system, which probably doesn't say a whole lot these days, but, you know, it's an old game. Also, this is the beginning of equipment having utilitarian purpose. So, like, with the gear you have equipped, you can go into the item menu and use that piece of equipment to cast spells. Even the warrior character can do this. So, it actually leads to a more in-depth equipment system, and it would be fun to play around with if there was a lot more to it. The problem is that there's only really a handful of items that actually have the capacity to do any of that stuff, and it's not a real big question as to what you want to carry with you. There's maybe a couple of pieces of gear where there's a question. Like, I remember there's a particular shield you can buy that actually has a couple of points of defense less than a shield you already have at the time, but the new shield can cast a cure spell on yourself. So yeah, there's some hidden reasons to use specific pieces of gear, and that's pretty cool. However, the game loses a lot in exploration, mostly because they drop the torch as an item, so you can just see in caves now with no reason or excuse, which is fine, because, you know, you don't need to implement torch mechanics in every fucking game where you go into a cave or anything, but it does reduce that little bit of complexity that the original title had. And now, saying all of this, how the game has improved with the combat and everything, like I said, it does take away from the exploration mechanics just a little bit, but even that part kind of makes sense because of the way items are distributed in this game and how many key items are necessary. And then there's the fact that nobody liked the torch mechanics except for me, so, you know, it was a really unpopular mechanic and they got rid of it. And then they streamlined a bunch of things, like you don't have to use a stair command to use stairs anymore. You just fucking jump on them and they get used. You know, you go up to a door, and if you've got the key, it'll open and stuff like that. So they've streamlined the interface quite a bit, and that's nice. And only having the one castle that you save at is no longer a thing, because now any place where you can save... Well, I guess that was true in the first game too, because there was only the one place. But now they have given you more places where you can save, and the places where you save are also where you happen to respawn next when you die, and they keep the minus to your gold, so there's still not really a whole lot of incentive for you to not die, but at the same time there kind of is, because gold is much more valuable this time around, because some of the late game gear that you can actually purchase is really, really expensive. But even then, this game was designed with that mentality that the first game had, where you're meant to go and figure it out all yourself. So you're meant to go into the wilderness and get lost and die and come back and forth and go here and there and everything, and you would acquire all of the gold you would need across your entire playthrough throughout a blind playthrough, especially considering no one tells you where anything is this time around. The characters could have been vague in the first game, and you may have needed multiple people to give you some little tidbit of what you needed to know before you could actually figure it out. But if you were diligent and spoke to everybody, it was not an issue. But even if you are diligent and speak to everybody, nobody tells you the stuff you need to know in this game. Because after you get to about the halfway point in the game, it's about the time you get the ship in the game, you will be absolutely lost as to what to do next. Mostly because nobody tells you what you need to do after that point. Because the arc of it is your father tells you to seek out the prince. You go and you pick up the prince, who tells you need to go pick up the princess, and then you go and you figure out how to get the princess, and then you just kind of keep going where you can go. But at the end of that journey, you get a boat, and this boat will take you all across the world, and there is literally no place you can't go anymore. I would say this is where you come across your bridge scenario, where there's technically one place you can't go, and you're just trying to figure out how to go there, because that's the place to be. But the problem is this time nobody tells you even what you need to do to get there, let alone how to accomplish it. Because good luck finding the crests without an exterior guide. Good luck finding the eye without the exterior guide. Good luck on any of it, really. Pretty much after you get the ship, the game just kind of turns into, go wherever you want to and try to figure something out and see if you can do something. And once again, this is completely a numbers affair, so it's entirely possible, if you were working with a guide, or if you do have previous experience with this game, that you could end up at the final area of the game and just not have the numbers to be capable of beating the final boss, or even some of the the random encounter enemies along the way, so be prepared to grind, so you're gonna have to, which once again, you know, it feels like it was built to accommodate somebody who didn't know what they were doing and was just aimlessly wandering the world, and would take you forever and ever and ever to beat this game, but they didn't accommodate for any high skill players or anybody who would come back with knowledge of where things are and how to get things. So there's not a whole lot of potential in actually having like high skill play to this game, and the game just ends up wearing on and on, because one of the strengths of the first game was the brevity to it. It was very tight. It had about as much as you could reasonably want in a game like this. The problem is that the second game is bigger and better, but like technically it is better in nearly every single way, and it's certainly a much larger game with much more things to do, with a whole lot more things to do. So it's hard to look at it and say that it's not objectively a better game than the first game, but the pacing of the first game is so much better than the pacing of this second game that it just leads to that much more of an enjoyable experience, even though it's a more clunky game. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it. Like, I played the whole game, but I got to about the halfway point and I started hating it ever since then. Like, the first game never did that. I never started hating the experience of playing the game. I just, you know, when I got done with my first playthrough, I was like, oh, I want to go back and play this again and see where I could be more efficient and see if I could possibly get here or there quicker, or if there is a better way to do this or that. And it was mostly futile in the first game because it's such a numbers-based affair, so you just, making the game more expedient is ended up making the game more boring because you just have to go out and grind. That's what you have to do. And there's a fair bit of that in this game, but the issue is that I didn't even want to do it in this game because it's so poorly paced. It's just not fun to play after a certain point. After you get to about the point where you get the boat, it just stops being fun. Because there's nothing really new at that point either, because by then you've had all three of your characters, you've experienced group battles, you've experienced boss battles, you've even got your hand on a couple of items that'll actually cast spells for you from the item menu. So, like, you've pretty much seen everything the game has to offer. You just haven't gone through the final jumping through the hoops to actually beat the game. So it was just much less pleasant experience, and I really started hating it at about the halfway point, and yeah, wouldn't recommend it. Not at all. Play the first game if you must know where this whole JRPG thing started. Go back and play the first Dragon Quest game, but don't bother with the second one. Skip over it. It's, I don't know, maybe the Game Boy Color version's better, but this one is just bad. Don't play the NES version. Don't do it. Save yourself the headache. It's terrible.